Hello, welcome to part 2 of this Jones Act explainer video. If you're here for the first time, click on one of these buttons and go watch part 1 of this video for a little more context. And if you're here for part 2, congratulations, welcome back. I'm very proud of you. Enjoy the video. On with it. Puerto Rico is kind of this commonwealth. It's almost a state, it isn't. It's kind of this in-between place. The argument is, why are they not exempt from the Jones Act when there are so many other things that they are exempt from, and also in other ways treated like a state too?
Yeah, and also they are subjected to the Jones Act, even though they have no voting representation in Washington. Puerto Rico was never in a position to give its assent to the Jones Act, to sign off on it. As I think I mentioned in that panel discussion, Puerto Rico, of course, didn't voluntarily join the United States. It was taken by conquest in the Spanish-American War. They've been subjected to our cabotage laws since 1898, I believe. The Jones Act was passed in 1920. There was no one in Congress representing Puerto Rico to vote for or against that law or speak their piece and give their input about it, and yet they are subjected to it. Right next to Puerto Rico are the U.S. Virgin Islands. They are exempt from the Jones Act. So it's a bit inconsistent that they are a territory and not in a position to sign off on the Jones Act and give their assent to it, and yet they are subjected to it.
Like every other state, if we were going to ship something from New York to Florida for whatever reason in a boat, don't know why we would do that, but if we were to do that, it would have to be on a U.S. ship. So it also has to be on a U.S. ship to Puerto Rico, but the only difference is Puerto Rico doesn't have any other option because it's an island. So they only have the option of using these U.S. boats, right?
When doing business with the U.S. mainland, now one thing they can do is buy things from other countries, because then you don't have to pay the Jones Act shipping. You can use much cheaper international shipping. And in fact, the Congressional Research Service shows that since, I believe, the 1960s, Puerto Rico has increased significantly its purchases of foreign products instead of U.S. products, which is kind of remarkable because even though on the one hand they pay lower shipping, then they also have to deal with things like customs and tariffs and just more hoops that you have to jump through. When doing business with the U.S., you don't have to fill out additional forms. There's no customs involved in buying products from the U.S. mainland. Yet Puerto Rico has shifted a lot of its purchases to foreign countries. I highly suspect, in large part, to get around the Jones Act or to avoid paying those high Jones Act shipping costs. One example I gave is natural gas. Puerto Rico uses natural gas for about 40% of its electricity. The United States has a lot of natural gas. Puerto Rico cannot buy it. The reason they can't buy it is because there are no ships meeting those Jones Act requirements, U.S. built, U.S. owned, et cetera, that are capable of transporting large amounts of natural gas. They have to buy 100% foreign. If Puerto Rico was a separate country, it would actually be easier for them to do business with the United States, which is their main trading partner and the largest economy in the world, which is something really bizarre when you stop and think about it.
If Puerto Rico is starting to trade with, since the 1960s, they've been trading more internationally. Why aren't they doing that mostly? Is it because Puerto Rico is just a smaller government? It's kind of more difficult?
There's no getting around doing business with the United States. It is the largest economy in the world. So I think it's only natural. I mean, they use the same currency. It's only natural that Puerto Rico would do a lot of business with the United States. I think even with the cost of the Jones Act, there's no way of getting around. There's no world in which you say, we're just going to live on or solely import products from other countries, because there's some things made in the U.S. that just aren't that replaceable or easily replaceable. I think they're just natural linkages built into that. So that's always going to be the case. But I think the data also shows that Puerto Rico has made a concerted effort to look more abroad for some of its needs, precisely so they don't have to pay the cost of the Jones Act.
So they're kind of making their way to that.
Yeah, they're never going to go to zero. I think with regard to trade with the United States, it's always going to be a huge trading partner of theirs, Jones Act or no Jones Act. But I think there's considerable evidence that there is an effort also being made to look to foreign sources.
You said a couple of really interesting things that I wanted to touch on. US built container ships can cost up to 5 times as much as those built in other countries. Why is it so much more expensive?
One, it's kind of baked into the cake. Number one, if you're an American shipbuilding shipyard, well, if you have the Jones Act, that means that the United States is a captive market for you. That Americans that need to buy ships have to go to you. You don't have to compete against other shipyards from other countries. So there's less incentive to be the best and to excel. You only have to be better than the other American shipyards. You don't have to be better than other foreign shipyards. I think if you apply that same logic to, say, automobiles or airplanes, I think Boeing is one of the biggest manufacturers of airplanes in the world, and there's no Jones Act style US build requirement for airplanes. I think Boeing is better because they don't have that than if they had that, because Boeing has to be the best. They have to be better than Airbus. They can't just say, oh, well, we got this captive US market, so we don't have to excel. And they have to always be on their toes. I think same with US automakers. They have to compete against the Japanese, the Europeans. They have to be the best. US shipbuilders don't have to be the best.
I have understood that it was meant to promote shipbuilding. Who's profiting then?
It's a good question, because you step back, you say the people who are supposed to benefit from this law are not doing that well. If you look across the full spectrum, back in the 1950s, there were something like, I think, 450 or so Jones Act ships. And today we're down to 99. I think even if you went back to the early 1980s, there were well over 200. So I think actually back in 2000, there were 193 ships. So the fleet is like halved in the last 20 years or so. But I think, so you have to ask yourself, why do these guys keep supporting a law that is not supporting them and that they're doing so poorly? And I kind of think it's like the game of musical chairs, where everyone's hoping, hey, by the time everything falls down, I'll be out of the game or something like that. But everyone wants to keep this going as long as possible, because I think change is hard. So when you offer people protectionism, it's like a poison pill. They can't say no. They're kind of lured in by it, but ultimately it's bad for them.
Because they have their jobs, and it is pretty detrimental, it seems, to Puerto Rican people and the economy, but they have.
This is the argument I always make to people. On the one hand, there are very real costs with the Jones. I think every 90-something% of economists would agree that the Jones Act is a net cost to the United States. There's, I think, widespread agreement on that. Now, if we had these costs, but on the other hand, we had this thriving maritime sector, and we had these great shipyards, and we had lots of ships, that would be one argument. But the costs are real, but I ask, where are the benefits? We don't have a big fleet. We have a fleet that's in decline.
Can you tell me a little more about who's really pushing to keep the Jones Act going?
Yeah, so one question you get a lot is people say, well, if the law is so bad, why does it stay in place? Or why hasn't it even been changed a little bit? There's been no real reform to it, no changes. It's stood in place more or less for at least 100 years. And I think it's a classic case of dispersed costs and concentrated benefits. We all pay the cost of the Jones Act. It means we pay more for the goods that we purchase. And some parts of the country pay more than others. I think Puerto Rico would be one example of people that disproportionately are hit by this law. But I think it applies to all Americans. The problem is most Americans are not even aware of the Jones Act. There was an episode of Jeopardy last year where the category is Puerto Rico, and the $500 question, the answer was the Jones Act.
Written to protect ships from German U-boats, this 1920 act dealing with shipping was said to be hurting Puerto Rico's economy in 2017. Ryan.
What is the Embargo Act?
No. Elizabeth.
What is the Johnson Act?
No. Nate's not going to try on this. It's the Jones Act.
If you ask the average American about it, or even if you made them aware, they'd say, yeah, that seems wrong. That's not right. But I think at best, it's not a make or break issue for a lot of Americans. Whereas it's not like abortion or guns or one of these hot button issues. But in contrast, for the people that perceive themselves, at least, as benefiting from it, be it the people that crew these ships, be it the people that own these ships, or the people that build these ships, they view this law as existential. This is everything to them, and they lobby accordingly. So most Americans don't know, don't care. In contrast, there are multiple organizations that I'd say, at least 70% of their mission, something like that, is dedicated to maintaining the Jones Act. And this is the unions that crew U.S. vessels. It's the Marine Engineers Beneficial Association. It's the Seafarers International. It's the Sailors Union of the Pacific, Masters, Mates, and Pilots, on and on. It's the other companies that own and operate these ships. It's Tote and Crowley, that serve the Puerto Rico trade, or Matson out in Hawaii and Alaska. It's going to be the shipbuilders. There's the Shipbuilders Council of America, and they're lobbying for this all the time. These guys, they have their members write letters. They have a well-funded lobbying apparatus. They are constantly educating members of Congress. I suspect that a lot of members of Congress, like the general public, they show up and they don't know much about the Jones Act. And the first person that knocks on their door is not going to be someone saying, hey, this is a bad law, we need to do something about it. Someone saying, hey, let me tell you about this super pro-American law that mandates the use of American vessels and American sailors, and who could be against that? And also, this is great for national security, and you should be for it, and here's a check for your campaign, and let's stay in touch.
I guess there's just no organization, no organizing on the side that's saying to repeal.
I think that a lot of people saying, anywhere, if you ask them, how do you feel about the Jones Act, you probably find a fair number that say, yes, I'm against it. But when they go in the voting booth, is that the issue where they say, look, I don't care where you stand on all these other issues. I just want to know where do you stand on the Jones Act? The people that think that way and vote that way tend to be people that support the law. Whereas people that are opposed to it, that's not going to be, they'll hold their nose and vote for someone that supports the Jones Act because they may agree with them on any other number of issues.